Kingsmead kept 1 hour a week holier than it would admit to the vicar, and it fell on Saturday at 4 o'clock, in the 2 rooms behind the old bookshop, where the lending library lived, and the lamp was lit early, whatever the sky was doing. The benches were full by 10 minutes to the hour. Children in front, on the low bench worn pale by 30 years of children. Carters and grandmothers behind. Mrs. Pemble's own 3 grandchildren, flat on their stomachs on the floor, by custom and conquest. Ursula Pemble sat in the reader's chair with the 2nd volume open on her knee, and the whole room leaning towards her like a field in wind. She was 61, silver-haired, straight-backed, with a pencil pushed through the knot of her hair and her steel spectacles halfway down her nose. And she had a voice the parish would have known in the dark. Half of Kingsmead had learned to sit still to that voice. The other half had learned to read by it. Georgie, the Carter's youngest, 9 years old and the worst sitter the front bench had ever held, sat still as a fence post with his lips moving along under hers, word for word, a beat behind. She brought the chapter to the top of the stairs, put the villain's hand on the door handle, and shut the book. The groan went up on cue. She had been cultivating that groan for 30 years, and considered it her best work. "Read on, next Saturday," said Ursula, over the top of it, and the hour was ended. Chairs scraped, and the room turned itself back into a village. Georgie appeared at the desk before the benches emptied, to put his weekly question. "Is the villain going to open the door, Mrs. Pemble?" "That's next Saturday's business, Georgie. But do you know?" "I know everything in this room, Georgie. That is why I sit in the chair." The gossip came in with the coats, as it did. Ambleworth Hall had its Duke home for good, they were saying down the 2nd bench. The shutters open on the south front for the first time in 3 years, and half his furniture come up from London. "For good, they say," said the sexton's wife, gathering her granddaughters. "Given the place over to his son entire, and come home to be quiet. 66, and a widower these 3 years, and they do say a finer-looking man never came home to a quieter house." "Then I hope he reads," said Ursula, stacking volumes, and the room laughed, and she went on stacking. 4 miles off, on the far side of the hill, Ambleworth Hall was having its own evening, and its evening was the trouble. The drawing-room was long and handsome and warm, and it held 2 people and a silence. Leopold, Duke of Ambleworth, sat at one end of it with the fire going and his hands empty. His sister, Lady Araminta, sat at the other with the county paper, reading it briskly and to the end. Between them stood a small chair, angled to face his. It had stood angled to face his for 31 years, in this room and in the London one before it, and in 3 years he had let go of every other arrangement of hers, and kept that one. The hour after dinner came every day, and every day it had exactly nothing in it. Blanche had read aloud to him every evening of their marriage. Novels, travels, sermons, rubbish, whatever the table held, and she held strong opinions on all of it, and delivered the villains in a voice that would have got her hissed off any respectable stage. He had loved her for 31 years, and told her so, and when she died he had mourned her honestly and long, and the mourning had done its honest work, and settled into gratitude. He would say all of that plainly to anyone who asked. What he could not say plainly, because it had taken him 3 years to find the shape of it, was this: a man can miss a voice the way other men miss a country. The evenings were the country he had been exiled from. He was 66, home for good, done with London, easy with his son, at peace with his God, and at the sounding of the drawing-room clock each night, he sat in a silence with a shape to it, and the shape was hers. Nobody's story is done while they're still in it. Leopold had privately concluded otherwise 3 years ago, and had been wrong ever since, and had one clue to go on: the crates. 11 crates of Blanche's books stood in the small study, corded as they had come up from London. He could not shelve them, because shelving them meant deciding they were his. He could not open them for the same reason. Twice he had gone in with a clawbar and come out having dusted the tops. Araminta put down the paper and looked at her brother down the length of the quiet, with the air of a woman who had been drafting her remark for days. "You are aware, Leopold, that you have been sitting an hour with your hands empty." "I am resting, Araminta." "You are listening," said his sister, "to a room with nobody in it. And you have done it every evening since you came home. And I have sat here and watched you do it, and I am done watching." She let that stand a moment, and then went on more gently, because she had loved Blanche too. "The crates are still corded in the small study, 11 of them. You go in with the bar, and you come out with clean hands, and the books sit there in the dark, which she would have hated. Blanche never owned a book she didn't press on somebody inside the year. And what would you have me do with them? Shelve them? They'd stand in my library like 11 headstones. Then don't shelve them." She folded the paper with a snap. "The village keeps a lending library, behind the old bookshop. The bookseller's widow has it. 30 years, they say. And half the parish sits to her of a Saturday to be read to. Books are for reading, brother." Blanche held that opinion loudly. "Give hers where they'll be read." He looked at the fire for a long while. "A lending library," he said at last, "in Kingsmead. And I've been 3 years on the other side of this hill, and needed my sister to tell me of it." "You've been 3 years on the other side of everything," said Araminta, and took up the paper again, having won. He went along the corridor and looked at the crates. They looked different, considered as a gift. They looked, for the first time in 3 years, possible. "The first crate," he said to the empty study, "I'll carry myself." He mistimed his first visit. The hall's information had run to the day and stopped short of the hour, and so he came on the Saturday and came in the middle of it. The carriage put him down in the market square at 4 o'clock exactly, and he walked to the old bookshop with a corded crate of books in his own arms. A tall, straight-backed man, silver going bright at the temples, in a coat that had no business on a carrier's job, and found the shop shut and the passage beside it standing open, with a lamp lit at the end of it and a voice coming out. He meant to leave the crate in the passage and go. He stopped in the library doorway to see where to set it down, and the voice was mid-chapter, and he stopped there altogether. It was a low, sure, carrying voice, and it was doing all the things an evening voice does. It walked the sentences instead of trotting them. It gave the colonel his full weight, and the sergeant his comedy. It paused where the listening needed a pause, and the room of benches breathed when it let them. The Duke of Ambleworth stood in that doorway with a crate of his dead wife's books in his arms, listening to a woman he had never met, read an adventure novel to a village, and understood that he would be staying to the end of the chapter if it took until Michaelmas. The benches were full. Every seat in the 2 rooms was taken but one, and the one was at the front, the low children's bench, worn pale, with a gap on it between the carter's youngest and the carter's dog. The Duke of Ambleworth set his crate down quietly by the wall, walked up the middle of the lending library at Kingsmead, and folded himself onto the children's bench. It took some folding. His knees ended somewhere near his chin. The dog shifted along companionably to make room, and Georgie glanced up once, established that the enormous silver gentleman was nobody who would make him lose his place, and went back to mouthing the words. Ursula saw it from the reader's chair. She saw everything from the reader's chair, and did not lose so much as a syllable. But she read the last page of that chapter to a room that had doubled its attention, and if the Colonel's escape had a little more thunder in it than the author strictly wrote, the author was in his grave and past minding. "Read on. Next Saturday," said Ursula, and closed the book and looked over her spectacles at the children's bench. The room emptied slowly and on purpose, everybody finding a reason to fuss with their coats. The introductions were made by the sexton. "Your Grace, this is Mrs. Pemble, as keeps the library. Mrs. Pemble, His Grace, the Duke of Ambleford." He got 3 titles wrong in the one breath, and nobody corrected him. The Duke fetched his crate and named its origin plainly. "My late wife's books, madam. The first crate of 11, if the library will have them, and given to be read. And then, because a gift of books wants opening, the 2 of them stood at the big desk under the lamp with the cords cut and the first volumes out, and she opened straight to a travel journal and read out the author's most solemn sentence, 3 lines on the sublimity of an Alp, delivered with perfect gravity over her spectacles. He goes on like that for 2 volumes, Your Grace. I remember this gentleman. The mountain survives him." "She could not abide him," said the Duke. "She read him to me the winter of the year 9, doing the Alps in the voice of our bishop, and I laughed until she had to leave off and laugh too. I'd know that copy anywhere." "Then the copy stays on my shelf, and Your Grace shall visit it," said Ursula, and the lamplight took the pair of them together. 2 silver heads bent over one open book, his hand steadying the page while she turned it, her face lifted to his, both of them laughing at a dead man's Alp, with the crate open between them, and the last coats in the doorway taking careful note. He asked it plainly at the end. He had rehearsed it on the way down, and she could hear the rehearsal in it. "Does the library admit subscribers from my side of the hill, madam?" "It admits anyone who returns what he borrows, Your Grace." "Which is yes." The village was enchanted beyond all decorum, and made a theatre of it, and the theatre ran all spring. By Monday the whole parish knew the size of the crate and the length of the stay. By Tuesday, the old ladies who kept the window seats at the draper's opposite had rearranged the chairs to face the bookshop passage, and sat their mornings there in a row, 3 abreast and unrepentant, and were candid about it when accused. "We are watching the passage, Mrs. Doggett, and will thank you to leave the middle chair as it stands," was the official position. 40 years I've watched this square, and it has given me 2 runaway pigs and a bishop with his hat off. It owes me. What carried it round the county was better than rank. The biggest man in 6 parishes had sat down on the littlest bench in Kingsmead to hear the end of a chapter. People liked him for it before they had ever heard him speak. He came in on the Thursday to be entered as a subscriber. Ursula opened the loan book and wrote him into it in her round hand between a dairyman and the curate, while the room held its breath over the shelf of sermons. He paid his fee to the farthing. He borrowed, on her recommendation, the first volume of a new novel in 3 volumes, The Adventures of One Colonel Vasey, late of the Peninsula, beginning with the Colonel's return to an inheritance that somebody else was living in. "I'll warn you fairly, Your Grace. The first volume is all powder, and the charge comes in the second. Half my subscribers give it up at the aunt. The aunt is a fence to be got over, and the book pays for it after. Then I'll take the fence on your word, madam." He weighed the volume in his hand. "You've read it, I take it. Twice, once for myself, and once to see how it would read aloud. She considered him over the spectacles and made him an offer as a professional courtesy. "If your grace means to go at it alone, go with my blessing. But a book argued over is twice the book. Read your chapter before you call, and I'll read mine, and we'll quarrel about the kernel like Christians." It was the most respectable arrangement in the world. It rearranged both their weeks on the spot, and neither of them said so. On his second call, she caught him. They were 3 chapters in by agreement, and she made a remark about the sergeant, and the Duke replied to the remark that a man who lied that fluently at the toll house would lie at the trial too, and the trial was in chapter 4. Ursula took off her spectacles, which those who knew her knew for the drawing of a sword. "You read ahead, your grace." "I could not sleep, madam. The colonel had been left in the cellar. The colonel has been in that cellar since Tuesday for every other soul in this parish. The children have him in the cellar until Saturday, and the children are bearing it." "The children," said the Duke with dignity, "are made of sterner stuff than I am." She sentenced him where he stood, readmitted on probation, rationed strictly, a chapter a visit, and never a page over. And out of the sentence came the ribbon, a green one from the drawer of the desk, laid in the book at the end of each chapter they had argued, and moved forward each visit, and the rule was the rule of the ribbon. We stopped here. He kept to it. It cost him visibly, and she enjoyed that. And he let her see it cost him, and that, though it was weeks before she said so to herself, she enjoyed the more. The hall, meanwhile, sent its own inspector. Lady Araminta arrived the following week on the transparent pretence of a subscription of her own, prepared by her own account to find a scheming widow and deal with her. She was in the library 40 minutes. She came out having subscribed, borrowed 2 volumes, quarrelled delightfully about a third, and been told a thing about her own favourite author so evidently true that she repeated it at dinner as her own. Her report to her brother was delivered over the soup with treasonous satisfaction. "I went to reconnoitre Leopold, and I have come back conquered and enlisted. She is the best company in this county, and I include myself. Whatever you are doing, do it faster." The village's delight had one gentle exception. Rosanna, Ursula's married daughter, 3 children, a warm heart, and a level head, came up the passage on the Friday, with the vertigo showing plainly on her. "Mother, the whole county watches that room. Then the county will improve its mind," said Ursula, shelving. But that night, alone, with the lamp out and the shop quiet under her, Ursula Pemble had 1 hour of honest doubt, and the doubt was not about the Duke at all. Courted, at 61. In the one room where she had been the fixture, the reader's chair itself, for 30 years, conspicuous, in front of the parish that thought it knew every page of her. She lay in the dark, and heard the county laughing, and it took her most of the hour to notice what she would have noticed in half a minute had the woman been anybody else. For 30 years, any soul in Kingsmead who came to her doubting had got the same answer. "Your story is worth the wanting, and worth the hearing, and I'll hear it now." She had said it to farm girls and to widows, and once, memorably, to the sexton. She turned over at the end of the hour and said it to the last woman in the parish who had needed telling. "Well then, Ursula," she said to the dark, in the voice the whole village would have known, "your own medicine, swallow it." The courtship was conducted at a lending library desk in full public view, 40 minutes at a time, and the parish borrowed books it did not want for the pleasure of walking past it. He called twice a week, then 3 times. They read their rationed chapter apart and fought about it together, and the fighting was the thing itself, and both of them knew it by June. He read for the campaigns and the bridges and the state of the Colonel's supply lines. She read for the people and could tell him what the aunt wanted before the aunt knew. He was scandalized, genuinely, it went to his principles, by her habit of forgiving authors their endings. The man built 3 volumes to reach that marriage, madam, and bungled it in 4 pages. You cannot pardon it. I can. He got them to the church, Your Grace. I've buried too many good stories for want of 4 pages to hang an author who delivers his people alive. She tapped the volume. You judge books the way you'd judge a bridge. Does it stand? Will it bear the traffic? I judge them the way you'd judge a parish. Any bridge falls if you ask it to carry what it wasn't built for. And what was this one built for? Getting 2 stubborn people to a church, said Ursula, which it did, and went to the shelves, because the room had got warm. They finished Colonel Vasey's first volume in May, and took up the second, and the ration held mostly. The ribbon moved forward, a chapter at a time, green against the page. We stopped here, and the phrase itself passed into their private coinage before either of them noticed the minting. When he grew impatient with the aunt, and everyone grew impatient with the aunt, Ursula would lay 2 fingers flat on the closed cover and say, "Patience, Your Grace. You'll not read ahead on me." And the Duke would fold his hands and compose himself under the sentence, and the curate remarked to his wife that the pleasure those 2 took in this small theatre was its own kind of banns. Once that spring, the ration broke the other way. She reached the end of their chapter on a wet Thursday, with the rain hard on the passage roof and the lamp lit at noon, and the chapter ended badly for the sergeant. And Ursula looked at the ribbon, and looked at the Duke, and turned the page. "One more," she said, with a glance at the ceiling above the history shelf. "It's raining, and the roofer has promised me every Thursday since Michaelmas, and arrived on none of them, and I'll not send the sergeant to the assizes and Your Grace into the wet on the same afternoon." They read the extra chapter aloud between them, trading the book across the desk paragraph about paragraph, and it was the first time he heard how a page sounded in his own mouth with her listening, and he thought about it the whole way up the hill. The dead were spoken of easily and kindly and often, for both of them were past the age of pretending otherwise. Bartle Pemble came into the desk conversation sideways, with a joke. 29 years of marriage, the shop kept together, the library built out of it, volume by volume, a book dusty, laughing, argumentative marriage, and she gave the Duke the whole flavour of it, in pieces across a month. He courted me with recommendations, Your Grace. Every one of them wrong. He gave me a treatise on husbandry the 2nd week, and sermons the 3rd, and I was a month deciding whether the man was a fool before I saw what he was at. He was choosing books he wanted my opinion of. It was the opinion he was collecting. When I taxed him with it, he said a bookseller can judge a customer in one purchase, but a wife wants a fuller catalogue, and he'd thank me to keep talking. She dusted the volume in her hands and put it down without a sound. He'd a laugh that fetched customers in off the street, who then had to buy something out of decency. 29 years, and the last thing he did in this world was mind the shop while I was at my sister's, and sell 3 volumes of poetry to a man who came in for an almanac. I was well married, Your Grace. I know the difference between a full life and an empty one, and I'll thank the county to remember I had the full one. "The county has the fact on record, madam," said the Duke. "I've heard his praises in 3 villages, and the tone men use for him, It's the tone I hope for myself, and I'll say my ambition plainly, to be spoken of at that desk some day, the way you speak of him at it. And Blanche came into the library in her own way, crate by crate. Ursula shelved the Duchess's books as they were catalogued, and a woman's books will tell you a great deal about the woman. Travels, wicked memoirs, sermons bought in duty and plainly opened once, 3 copies of one novel worn soft as glove leather. Ursula read the collection as she read her subscribers, and one wet afternoon by the stove she said her conclusion out loud, not knowing he was near enough behind her to hear it. She bought this one 3 times, Your Grace, and wore all 3 out. That's a woman who read for the people, and knew what she loved, and went back to it without shame. I'd have liked her. We'd have fought over authors like 2 dogs over a bone, and lent each other everything. The Duke was a while answering, and when she turned from the shelf she saw why, and had the grace to go on shelving while he got his face back. She'd have lent you the 3rd copy, he said at last. The 3rd copy went to nobody. That was the measure of her esteem, madam, and you'd have had it inside a fortnight. The spectacles began in the 2nd week, and were a scandal by the 4th, in the mild way the parish preferred its scandals. He forgot his spectacles, silver-rimmed, worn for reading these 15 years, and present at church without fail, as the parish noted. A man who cannot read the page must share one, and sharing is done at a small distance. You have forgotten your spectacles again, Your Grace. I have, madam. It is becoming a failing. It is becoming a habit. Madam, said the Duke gravely, at my age, the 2 are past telling apart. So the chapters were argued shoulder to shoulder at the desk, 1 book flat between them, her steel spectacles catching the lamp. And when at last he gave the forgetting up as beneath them both, the silver pair came back and stopped going home. By midsummer, the 2 pairs lived folded side by side on the library desk, hers and his, and the parish had seen it, and the old ladies at the draper's window considered it, on the whole, better than the opera. There was more in the room than argument, and it was real. Her hand on his sleeve when a line landed, and staying a moment past the line. The walk out to the carriage got slower by degrees, week on week, until it was the longest 40 yards in the county. Once, handing her up the step of her own passage, he kept the hand a full breath after the handing was done, and she let him, and neither said a word about it, and both were poor company for the rest of the day by all reports. It was Georgie who said it. Of course it was Georgie. Mid-hour, on a full Saturday, in the sort of pause a reader leaves for effect, the carter's youngest delivered the parish's entire private observation in 1 clear treble sentence. Mrs. Pemble reads the Duke's chapter twice. The room went up. Ursula went scarlet to the collar, 61 years old and scarlet as a girl, over the top of volume 2, and the back row memorized the Duke's face for future telling, and what the face said, they told everyone, was pleased. She restored order with the voice. It took her longer than it had ever taken her in 30 years, and part of the delay, the front bench swore, was that the reader herself was laughing. By high summer the thing had roots on both sides of the hill, and they went wider than the pair of them. Araminta and Ursula became friends on their own account, and would have been furious to hear it called an alliance of convenience, because it was a treaty of pleasure. They were 2 women of 60, who had spent 40 years being the sensible one in every room, and they recognized each other, and it took at once. Araminta came to the library on days her brother stayed home, and reported the visits to him with cruelty. I was at the library today, Leopold. You were not. She was in looks, and asked after nobody. They fought about novels, agreed savagely about people, and were once asked to be quieter by the curate, an event Araminta said she had engraved on her memory as the finest compliment of her widowhood. "I have decided what you are, Mrs. Pemble," Araminta announced one such afternoon, from the depths of the second-best chair. "You are the only woman in this county who has ever made me want to hear the end of somebody else's sentence. I was married 32 years to a man who improved every silence he was given, God rest him, and I came out of it with a low opinion of talk. You have unsettled it. Then borrow another volume, my lady, and we'll unsettle it further." "I shall, and I'll tell you a thing for free, since we deal so honestly." Araminta leaned on the desk, and for a moment the brisk went out of her voice, and something older and kinder stood in its place. "My brother has begun to time his week from Saturday. He thinks I've not noticed. He arranged the whole of last Tuesday around being disappointed that it was Tuesday. I've watched that man be Ambleworth since he was 30, and be it well, and I had begun to think Ambleworth was all that was left in the coat." She straightened. "There's a man in it again, madam. I find I'm in your debt, and I mean to be a nuisance about it." The letter from the heir came in July, and Leopold read it standing, with the look of a man braced, and then sat down halfway through and passed it to his sister without a word. The Marquis wrote from London, warmly and at length and completely unbraced, and Araminta read the best of it aloud to the drawing-room with relish. "I have now had the story from 3 sources, sir, each more delighted than the last, and I write chiefly to say that your son is the 4th. I remember my mother's evenings too well to wish you one more silent one." Araminta looked up. "The boy writes better than you speak, Leopold," she resumed. "Pray stop being astonished at your own good fortune and get on with it. The children have questions. Their tutor declines to answer, and I have promised them a duchess who does the villains properly." Leopold looked into the fire, and his relief sat on him visibly. "He never knew I was braced for it," he said. "He knew," said Araminta. "That is why he wrote it warm, and put a joke at both ends. He is his mother's son." Rosanna's turning came in August, and it came by witness, the only door it could have come by. She walked up the passage one evening to fetch her mother to supper, and stopped short of the lamplight, because the 2 of them were at the desk and had not heard her, and the Duke's chapter lay on the desk unopened. He was asking her mother questions, about herself, about the shop as a bride, about the library's first 100 volumes, about her girlhood at Ketterwell before Bartle, about Bartle, and then sitting through each whole answer with his shoulders settled, in the manner of a man for whom the answer is the evening's engagement, and the book merely the excuse. And her mother was answering him, her sensible mother, the parish's asker, who had drawn out every soul in Kingsmead for 30 years, and been drawn out by nobody at all, was taking her own time over an answer about herself, and was lit up like the lamp between them. Rosanna stood in the dark passage a long minute. Then she went home and told her husband, "I have been a fool in a good cause, and I mean to say so at the desk in the morning." And she did. Her mother kissed her and put her to work shelving, and between those 2 women the matter was settled. The hall thawed the same month. The reading hour paid it a visit, a scheme of Araminta's, offered as a treat for the school children and prosecuted with rigour, and Kingsmead's children walked the long gallery of Ambleworth Hall with their mouths open. Georgie conquered it at a dead run inside the first minute, and was pursued by a footman who had been 9 himself and ran accordingly. Ursula read that Saturday's chapter in the great hall to the children of the village and the servants of the hall together, with the Duke stationed at the back, and nobody pretending he was there for the colonel. And that evening, when the wagons had gone and the hall was quiet, Araminta paused at the drawing-room door on her way up. Her brother was in his chair by the fire, with the day still on him. The small chair, the one that had stood angled to face his for 3 silent years, had been drawn a hand's breadth nearer the lamp. It had been sat in. It had, distinctly, been sat in. "I'll say good night, Leopold," said Araminta, and let the observation off its leash as she went. "The chair sits well again. I'd keep whatever's doing it." The question came kindly, because Kingsmead was a kind parish, but it came from every direction at once, and it was 2 words long. What for? All autumn and into the winter it was asked, over fences and at the draper's window and in the vestry, always with affection and always with the same puzzled tilt. Marriage, though, at their age, what would it be for? She had her library, her Saturdays, her name over the door of her own good life. He had his hall, his rank, his son settled, his sister for company. 2 happy people, each complete. The village wished them joy, and could not name what the joy would consist of. And the trouble with a kind question is that it gets indoors. Ursula heard it in her own kitchen, in her own voice, at 2 in the morning. A duchess's coronet on the bookseller's widow, whose whole standing in the world was that she belonged to the village. Leopold heard it on the hill in his own voice. He was asking a woman to trade a room where she was sovereign for a hall where she would be looked at. And then he made it worse. He made it worse in the largest way he knew, and that is how generosity usually goes wrong. He had the plans drawn in Bath, in secret, and they were handsome. And he brought the drawings down on a Saturday of all days, and unrolled them on the desk at the end of the reading hour, before the emptying benches, before Araminta, before Rosanna come to fetch her children, before half the parish with their coats half on. He was proud. It shone off him. Tall windows, the full south front, madam. You'd read by daylight till 7 in June. Dry walls, proper cases, the collection safe 100 years. A reading room for the village, with its own door and its own fires, and every soul in this parish welcome in it as they've been welcome here. He laid his hand flat on the beautiful inked elevation. And these 2 rooms that have worked you 30 winters, madam, you spared them at last. The room made the sound a room makes when it is delighted, and under the sound Ursula Pemble stood very still, with her hand flat on the drawing. On the beautiful marble room a man had planned in secret to move her life into. He had settled where her books would live. He had settled where she would live, for she went where the library went, and he knew it. And the one person entitled to decide any of it had been told last, in public, with the parish looking on. Her library, her Saturdays, her name over the door of her own life, spared her. She said it very low, and that was how the room knew. The village had heard that phrase from her a dozen times by then, and laughed every time, and the same words came out now with all the laughing gone, and landed like a slammed book. You read ahead, Your Grace. She rolled the drawings, evenly, and handed them back to him with both hands, as a borrowed volume is handed back, and then Mrs. Pemble thanked the room for coming, and closed the library early, for the first time in 30 years. The fortnight that followed was the worst either of them had passed in years, and the county felt it. He could not see it. That was the true misery of it. He had meant the drawings as the largest bunch of flowers a man ever picked. He walked the long gallery at night, turning it over. He had offered her everything, and everything had been the insult. And she, in the 2 rooms behind the shop, dusted shelves that were dusted, and was so exactly her usual self at the reading hour that everyone over 12 knew the size of it. She would not be shelved, however handsomely. A marble room with her collection in it, and her Saturdays inside his walls, was a monument, and monuments are built to finished things, and she had a horror she could not put down of being finished while she was still in the room. Araminta raged up and down the hall about it. You planned it in Bath, Leopold, in secret, for a woman whose whole religion is the asking. You might as well have bought the vicar's church to spare the vicar the walk. The second strike came, as the first had, from the front bench, mid-hour, in the pause after a chapter, in George's clear carrying treble, saying the thing every adult in the room was strenuously living around. Mrs. Pemble, the green ribbon hasn't moved in a fortnight. The room held its breath. Ursula looked at the front bench for a long moment over the top of her spectacles, and the front bench looked back with 9-year-old eyes that meant it kindly and meant it exactly. No, Georgie, she said at last, evenly. It hasn't. The book stops where both readers stopped. That's the law of the ribbon. And she read the hour's chapter to its edge, and closed the book, and gave the room its 2 words, as she had given them for 30 years. Read on, next Saturday. The words were the same words. Every adult on the benches heard what had gone out of them. But it was Rosanna who finished it. Rosanna, who had come the longest way round of anybody, and who walked up the hill to Ambleworth Hall unannounced, was shown into the great silent drawing-room, declined to sit, and told the Duke of Ambleworth to his face what a village daughter knows in her bones, and a duke can live 66 years without learning. Your wing is beautiful, Your Grace. I've no doubt of it, and I'll believe the windows are everything you say. But you have mistaken what that room is, and I'll not leave this carpet till you have it right. Her hands were steady on her shawl. You think the reading hour is where my mother works, and a man improves where a woman works and calls it kindness. It is not where she works. It is where she is from. I was raised on that floor, Your Grace. Half this parish was. You cannot move where a person is from into your house. However fine your house is, you can only ask, at the proper time, in the proper order, whether she'll add your house to it. She gathered herself, and her chin came up at exactly her mother's angle. She taught the whole village that everybody's story is worth asking for. 61 years, and she's still waiting her turn. Ask. Don't decide and call the deciding a gift. She has had a lifetime of doing for others, and it was a good lifetime, and the one thing left that anyone can give her is her turn. What unstuck them, in the end, was the roof, which had been keeping its own counsel above the history shelf for 40 years, and chose the February thaw to give its opinion. The snow went off the shop roof in one mild night. The melt found the age in the old back wall, and by grey first light the plaster over the history shelf was weeping, a long dark stain coming down through the whitewash, and the wet working inward towards 2,000 books. The sexton's boy saw it through the window at 7 and ran, and by 8 o'clock the village had turned out unasked. There was never a summons. Kingsmead simply arrived, in its work coats, as it arrived for any neighbour in trouble. The wall must be stripped and dried, and every book in the library must be out of those 2 rooms before the damp reached them, and the assembly room over the Crown was already being swept to receive them. And down the hill from the other side came the hall, for Rosanna had sent the sexton's boy on over the hill the moment he had raised the square. Every footman, groom and gardener Ambleworth owned, walking fast in the cold, and the wagons behind them, and Lady Araminta in the first wagon, with her plan of campaign already drawn up on the back of a laundry list, and on foot, ahead of the wagons, coat over one arm and his sleeves already rolled for work, the Duke of Ambleworth, who arrived at the passage door, met Ursula Pemble's eye across a room of half-crated books and asked for orders. "Where do you want me, madam?" "In the chain, your grace, between the smith and Mrs. Tapley. Mind Mrs. Tapley sets the pace, and mind you keep to it." "Madam," said the Duke, with the first happiness of a hard fortnight, and went where he was put. And Mrs. Tapley, 74, and equal to anything, looked the tallest man in the county up and down, and issued her one instruction: "2 hands under, your grace, never by the spine, and if you drop the sermons, nobody will grieve, but the picture books go through you over my body." "Ma'am," said the Duke, "they'll go through me dry and level if it takes till dark." The chain, when it formed, was the longest anybody could remember. Out of the library, down the passage, along the lane, and clean across the market square to the Crown's side stairs. The whole of Kingsmead, and the whole of the hall in one line, hand to hand to hand, the Duke's grooms between dairymen, the curate next to the poacher he prayed for weekly, and the books flowing along it all morning like a river deciding to move house. The children were given the picture books and carried them with terrible ceremony, two-handed, at a coronation pace. Araminta directed the wagons like a field marshal at the height of her powers, and was obeyed. Georgie stationed himself dead centre of the chain, at the corner of the square where both ends could be seen, and called the titles as they went through his hands, every one: sermons, more sermons, the picture Bible, mind your hands, Mrs. Tapley says. It was the one post on the chain where the whole village could watch him work. The whole village understood that, and left it to him. It was Georgie who set the cry going, near noon, as the first shelf's worth went up the Crown stairs dry. Read on, down the chain, hand to hand with the books, from the square to the passage door, half a cheer and half a promise, and Ursula stood in her emptied doorway and heard the village give her own 2 words back to her. By early afternoon it was done. The shelves were empty, the wall was stripped to its stone with the braziers going, and 2,000 dry books stood ranked in the assembly room over the Crown in an order Ursula would defend to her last breath, as an order. The chain broke up into its coats and its thanks, and she stood at the passage door and thanked them through, name by name, 30 years of names. At the end of it, 2 people were left in the emptied library, in the bare echo of it, with the lamp unlit and the reader's chair standing alone on the wet, darkened floor. He did not reach for a speech, and she watched him decline to reach for one. "I came to carry," he said. "That is all I came for. And I'd have come if you'd shut the door in my face and set me to work from the lane." He turned his hat in his hands, and then he said the rest of it out loud and unpractised, and the last of the village, coats on in the passage, heard every word, and he knew they could hear, and stood into it. "The hall doesn't want your library, madam. The hall never had the right to want it. I decided a thing that was yours to decide, and dressed it as a gift, and I have been a fortnight understanding what I'd done, and my sister and your daughter understood it in a day and told me so." His voice stayed level and cost him. "So I am asking, this time, at the proper page, what do you wish done? Say it, whatever it is, and I'll stand in a chain for it." Ursula looked at him across the empty room. The look took its time. It had a fortnight in it. "The roof mended," said Ursula. and the reader's chair where it always stood. "Which is forgiveness, madam," said the Duke, and settled his hat on with sudden purpose. "You'll have both before the end of March." The library, while its own walls dried, kept its Saturdays in the assembly room over the Crown, and kept something else there besides. It became their habit to stay on after the borrowing was done, the long room quiet, the fire let down, the lamp on the table between them, and the green ribbon standing near the end of Colonel Vasey's third volume. At last, the chapters had begun moving again the week after the chain, without one word spoken about the resumption. The ribbon simply went forward again, and both of them understood why, and were gentle with the book. And on a Tuesday evening in March, with the rain soft on the assembly room windows, and the last chapter one chapter off, Leopold, Duke of Ambleworth, put the volume down unopened, and paid her the truth instead. He told her about the evenings, all of it, plainly and in order, because that is how she had taught him a story once telling. 31 years, madam, and she read to me every evening of them. Novels, travels, rubbish, scripture, whatever the table held. She did the villains disgracefully. She argued with the authors in the middle of their own pages. I never once read aloud in that marriage myself, and I'll tell you the truth of why. She was better at it, and we both enjoyed her knowing it, and that was one of the sweetnesses of the thing. A marriage keeps its own offices, and that office was hers, and I was 31 years the luckiest listener in England. He turned his spectacles over once in his hands. And then it was 3 years of the hour after dinner, with nothing in it, her chair angled at mine, and the clock going, and a silence with her shape in it. I concluded it honestly, as a man closes a fair account, that the part of my life with a voice in it was a volume finished. Then I came down the hill with a crate, he said, meaning to leave it and go. And there was a voice coming out of a doorway. I stood in that passage, madam, like a man who has walked out of a long winter into a warm room, and I have known for months, and you are entitled to hear it said at your own desk, with the lamp on, that it stopped being about the reading, before spring was out. It is you. The argument is you, and the ribbon is you, and Saturday is you. I came for a sound, and stayed for the woman it belongs to. The lamp fizzed small in its oil. Ursula sat with her hands folded on the closed third volume, and for once in 30 years, the parish's reader took her full time in answering. "I'll pay that back in kind, Your Grace. You'll be the first soul alive to hear this, and I only found it out myself a fortnight since." She took off her spectacles, folded them, and set them on the table, and looked at the lamp rather than at him, and said it. "I've read to this village for 30 years, and for 29 years of marriage, before the Saturday hour and after it, I read to Bartle whenever the shop would let us, and it was good. Write that down as true, all of it, the whole life. I'd not trade one shelf of it. But I sat in this room after the chain, with everybody gone home, and I did the sum I'd somehow never done. A small breath. Nobody has ever read to me. In my whole life, Your Grace. Not once. Start to finish. Me in the chair and the voice somebody else's. I was the eldest at home, so I read to the little ones. I could do it, so I did it for Bartle, and gladly. I was the reader. So the village sat, and I stood. 61 years, and I have asked every soul in this parish for their story, and been the voice for half of them, and I never once noticed that the listening was a country I'd never been to. You missed your country 3 years, Leopold. I never even had the map. He was quiet a moment. Then the Duke of Ambleworth stood up, took the third volume of Colonel Vasey off the table, took his silver spectacles from where they lay folded beside her steel ones, and carried the book and the lamp to the far side, and set her own reader's chair, fetched up from the library weeks ago and standing in the corner, square to the light. "Sit in it," he said. "It's time you knew what your village knows." And then Leopold, Duke of Ambleworth, 66 years old, read a story aloud for another soul's pleasure, for the first time in his life. He was bad at it. He was gloriously, honestly bad at it. The Colonel came down the inn stairs at first light, read the Duke of Ambleworth too fast, and found the yard empty, the fires cold, and the innkeeper. "I beg the innkeeper's pardon, madam. I've given him the Colonel's voice." And the innkeeper gone. He went too fast, and hurt himself, and slowed too far. He put the emphasis down early in one sentence, and had to go back for it. He lost his place at the turn of a page, and said a word the Colonel would have approved of, and he went on. That was the tenderness of it, and it filled the room to the windows. A man of 66, proud all his life, and good at everything the world had asked of him, being willingly bad at something, out loud at length, because the woman in the chair had waited a lifetime for it, and refusing to stop, sentence after sentence, getting a little truer at it as the chapter went, the way a man does when he means to be doing this for years. Ursula Pemble sat in her own reader's chair, with her hands still in her lap and her eyes shut, and let herself be read to. When the chapter ended, he closed the book on the ribbon and looked up, and found her watching him, and the spectacles were off, and her eyes were bright, and neither of them pretended it was the lamp. She got out of the chair. He was there before she had finished getting out of it. And then they kissed, and it was slow, and it was certain, and it was nobody's first, and that was the riches of it. Two people who have loved well for 30 years apiece do not need telling what they have got hold of. She put her hand flat against the silver at his temple, and left it there. He gathered her in without haste, and without one particle of doubt, and it was plainly the first of a great many. When they stopped, they did not step back. They stood on in the middle of the long room over the crown, the rain going soft on the windows, the lamp burning itself down unattended, and neither of them spared it a look. "Your Grace," said Ursula into his collar, and her voice was not steady, and she did not care who heard that it was not. "You'll want practice." "Madam," said the Duke, over her head, "I mean to get it. The library came home with the spring, and came home as it had gone, by chain, a smaller chain, and a merrier one, down the crown stairs, across the square, along the lane, the whole village passing the books back hand to hand, the new plaster clean and white over the history shelf and the mended roof sound above it. The wagons ran, Araminta field-marshalled. Georgie called the titles through the square, and by evening the 2 rooms behind the old bookshop held their 2,000 again, in an order the parish had learned better than to question. The reader's chair went back where it had always stood. Ursula set it there herself, both hands on its back, and the village, filing out with its thanks, left the lamp lit behind it. One thing had come home unfinished on purpose. The 3rd volume of Colonel Vasey, green ribbon standing 1 chapter from the end, had been held back from the shelves by unspoken treaty. The last chapter belonged to the first evening in the mended room, and both of them had known it for weeks without a word exchanged on the subject. He read it to her. That too was settled without negotiation. She took the chair, and he took the book, and he read the Colonel home well. He read him home far better than a man has any right to who first read a story aloud in March. He had been practicing, and Araminta supplied the particulars afterwards from the doorway with vengeful joy. A fortnight, Mrs. Pemble, every night after 11, alone in the long drawing-room, doing an innkeeper. I have listened at that door in the sacred cause of intelligence, and I will die unrepentant. On Tuesday, he did the Colonel's sister, and I had to go up the back stairs, or be discovered laughing. He did the innkeeper and the Colonel in 2 voices now. He paused where the listening wanted it, and when the last page turned, and the Colonel came up his own lane at last to the woman who had held the inheritance together. 3 volumes, and the author, for a wonder, spent his full 4 pages on it and got it right. Leopold read the final sentence slowly, and closed the book on the finished story, and did not let go of her hand, which had been in his since the middle of the page. He looked at the closed book a moment. Then he crossed the room and sat down, deliberately, with some ceremony, and a full quarter of his old difficulty, on the low children's bench, worn pale, where he had first sat down to listen, knees near his chin, without one shred of dignity left, and without one particle of use for it. "I'll ask it from here," he said, "because here is where it started, and because you've spent 30 years telling this bench, the good part comes to those who sit still for it." He held her hand in both of his, and the words came out his own, and unborrowed, in the plain order she had spent 30 years teaching this parish a true thing once. 3 years ago I thought my story was told. I'd had a good book of it, a fine wife, a son I like, work worth the doing, and I thought the volume in my hand was the last, and I'd only the index left. Then I heard a voice out of a doorway. "Ursula, it was never the last volume. It was only a volume finished, and I stand here, sit here, asking the one person entitled to answer, will you write the rest of the shelf with me? Marry me. I've a hall that wants a voice in it, and evenings going spare, and I am asking for your story, madam, the whole remainder of it, every chapter you have, and I'll match it page for page with mine." "Yes," said Ursula. She said it first, and flat, and by itself, so that the main business was answered and could not be reopened. And then she came and stood over him on his ridiculous bench, and took his face in both her hands, and set out her terms from 1 inch off. That was not the distance the terms had been drafted at, and it did them no good at all as terms. "Terms, Your Grace. The library stays in the village, and stays mine. Your lawyers may put separate use on 1 sheet of paper, and I'll sign it at that desk. Saturday is the reading hour, Duke's notwithstanding, and I'll keep it myself till the parish buries me. I come to the hall as your wife, and I'll be a good one, but I'll not be an exhibit, and the first man who shows me to visitors like the long gallery will answer to my daughter, who is worse than I am. And the evenings," her thumb moved once along his cheekbone, "the evenings are ours, Leopold, yours and mine, and the lamps, and the chapter ration is hereby doubled." "Agreed," said the Duke, "to every article," and pulled her down to the bench beside him, and the applause broke out of the doorway, where Araminta and Georgie stood, without a scrap of shame between them, the field marshal and the front bench, Georgie having understood roughly half of what he'd heard, and applauded all of it. The banns were called 3 Sundays running, to a congregation that came early on purpose, and was seated to the last bench by the 2nd Sunday. They were married in May, in the parish church, with 2 families and 1 village filling it to the doors. The heir stood at his father's elbow, beaming, the two of them comfortable as men who have said the hard things already. Araminta sat in the front pew in grey silk with the satisfied stillness of a field marshal reviewing a campaign that had gone entirely to plan. Rosanna gave her mother away with a hand that never once wavered and an expression that surrendered everything her hand was holding back. And Ursula came up the aisle at 61 on her daughter's arm, silver hair full and high, in deep blue silk, with her steel spectacles folded in her hand like a posy. And the Duke of Ambleworth watched her the whole length of the aisle, with his rank clean forgotten, and his face making no attempt whatever to be a public one. Georgie was page. At the church door, in his best coat, planted in front of the painted banns board with the whole parish funneling past him, he squared his shoulders and read it. Aloud, alone, every word in his clear treble, tracing no letter with his finger, his first whole sentence ever read to an audience. Leopold, Duke of Ambleworth, to Ursula Pemble, widow, both of this parish. And the parish stopped in the porch and heard him out to the full stop, and then made such a noise over him that the bells lost the argument. 30 years of the reading hour stood in the church doorway in one small boy, and everybody knew it, and the bride kissed the top of his head on her way past, which he bore, he later said, because it was her. The wedding breakfast was laid in the library. Where else? Tables ran between the shelves, white cloths down the aisles of books, the new plaster still sweet in the air over the history shelf, and the reader's chair garlanded with white flowers at the head of the room, guest of honour and past arguing about it. The village ate in its Sunday best. Among the volumes, half of it was halfway through. The heir got up with his glass and said very little, and every soul between the shelves could hear that he was not performing. I promised my children a duchess who does the villains properly. Madam, I have heard my father's evenings when they had nothing in them, and I have heard them since. Whatever I say in the Lords hereafter, this is the sentence I shall be proudest of. The family is yours, and so are the villains. Araminta toasted the roof. It was Rosanna who caught the bridegroom, near the end, and her cry brought the whole room's heads round. Under the table, on the bridegroom's knee, at his own wedding breakfast, sat the first volume of the new novel, their next, chosen a week since, and embargoed by treaty until the honeymoon, open, and by the thickness of what he had turned, a good 4 chapters deep, caught, red-handed, in a wedding coat. The room waited, delighted, every face turning from the Duke to the bride, for the words the whole parish knew were coming. They knew them light, and they knew them grave, and they wanted to hear which it would be. Ursula rose. She came round the table, and took the volume off her husband's knee, and looked at how far he'd got, and looked at him. Then she drew the green ribbon from her sleeve, where it had ridden to church with her that morning, and laid it in the book at his page, and closed it, and gave the parish its last law. You may read ahead now, your grace. I mean to be there for every page. Madam, said the Duke, standing, to her and to the room, and to the years in front of them, I find I'd rather read aloud. That evening, the lamp burned late in the library window, as it would burn there for years after, and anyone crossing the square could see what it lit. The new novel open on the big desk, the ribbon at its first chapter, and 2 pairs of spectacles, one steel and one silver, folded together on the open page. And on the Saturday following, at 4 o'clock, the benches filled behind the old bookshop, as they had filled for 30 years. Children in front, carters and grandmothers behind, and a duchess sat in the reader's chair with the lamp lit early, and a duke sat on the children's bench with his knees near his chin, and the carter's dog against his boot. And when the chapter ended at the top of the stairs, and the groan went up on cue, it was he who said it. To the room, to her, to all the unwritten shelf in front of them. Read on. The end. And that is the story of Ursula and Leopold, of a woman who gave a village her voice for 30 years, and the man who sat down on the smallest bench in the parish to listen, and of one green ribbon that learned to keep two people's place, and being read to, at 9, or at 61, or tonight, is one of the oldest ways there is of being loved. So tell us true, from your own chair, who read aloud to you once, and whose voice do you still hear? Tell us in the comments below. We read everyone. If Ursula and Leopold warmed your evening, press the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Thank you for listening, and may there always be a lamp lit and a voice in your evening. Good night.